The lie was a stone in her shoe, a constant nagging ache she had nurtured for 6 years. Elara dragged her left foot as she crossed the grimy floor of the Rusty Flagon, the manufactured Limp a second skin. It was her shield, her invisibility cloak in a world that devoured the weak but overlooked the broken. Broken things were useless, and useless things were left alone. That was the theory anyway. She collected empty tankards, the stench of stale ale and unwashed bodies clinging to her worn tunic. Her stomach was a hollow, aching cavern. The half-loaf of bread she'd been given that morning was long gone, and the hunger was a familiar beast, gnawing at her insides. It sharpened her senses, made the raucous laughter of the patrons grate on her nerves like a file on bone. "Girl, more ale!" a burly merchant bellowed, slamming his fist on a sticky table. Elara flinched, but kept her face a placid mask. She nodded, her eyes downcast, and shuffled toward the bar, the familiar drag scrape of her foot, a pathetic rhythm on the floorboards. Anya, her only friend in this miserable town, was pulling a fresh draft, her own face pale with exhaustion. "Heard anything?" Anya whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. Elara shook her head, her throat tight. They spoke of the rumors that had been trickling in for weeks. Unrest at the border. Wolves, not the common kind, but the shifting kind, growing bolder. And with them whispers of the king, the Alpha King, Kaelan Blackmir, a name spoken like a curse and a prayer. A man said to be more beast than human, a ruler carved from shadow and rage. "Just keep your head down," Elara murmured, taking the heavy pitcher from Anya. "We're nobodies, ghosts. They don't see us." It was her mantra, the prayer she repeated every night in her tiny cold attic room. But tonight, the prayer felt thin. The air itself was tense, humming with a strange, predatory energy that had nothing to do with the drunken men in the tavern. It felt like the breathless moment before a lightning strike. Then the door exploded inward. It didn't swing open. It shattered, wood and iron flying across the room like shrapnel. A woman screamed. A tankard clattered to the floor. Silence, sudden and absolute, fell over the tavern. Through the splintered doorway stood 3 men cloaked in black, their faces obscured by shadows, but the silver wolf's head sigil on their armor was unmistakable. Vanthorn, a lesser house known for their ambition and their cruelty. They weren't royal guards, they were hunters. Elara's blood went cold. Her carefully constructed world of invisibility shattered in an instant. One of the men pointed a gauntleted finger, not at her, but at the tavern keeper, a fat, sweating man named Yorn. "The artifact," the lead man's voice was a gravelly rasp. "Lord Valerius wants it. Now." Yorn paled, his jowls trembling. I don't know what you're talking about." The man didn't argue. He drew his sword, the steel singing in the sudden quiet. The movement was a spark in a tinderbox. Chaos erupted. Men shouted. Tables were overturned. Yorn squealed and tried to scramble away. The Vanthorn soldier was on him in a flash, the blade descending. Elara didn't think. Primal terror, a force she had suppressed for years, seized her. Survival screamed one word in her mind: run. And she did. She dropped the pitcher, the ceramic shattering on the floor. Forgetting the limp, forgetting the years of practice, forgetting the broken girl she pretended to be, she turned and fled. She vaulted over an overturned bench, her movements fluid and desperate. She dodged a grasping hand, her body twisting with a grace she hadn't allowed herself in years. The back door, the kitchens, the alley. That was her only thought. She burst through the swinging doors into the smoky kitchen, the cook shouting in surprise. She didn't stop. She shoved past him, her feet flying across the greasy flagstones. The back door was just ahead, a small rectangle of moonlit hope. She threw her shoulder against it, the wood groaning, and then she was out, stumbling into the muddy alley. The cold night air hit her like a physical blow. She gasped, her lungs burning, and ran. She ran like the hounds of hell were at her heels. Her worn leather shoes slapped against the cobblestones, the sound echoing in the narrow passage. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The sounds of screams and steel faded behind her as she plunged deeper into the warren of alleys that made up the town's poorest quarter. She had to get away, vanish, become a ghost again. But a new sound cut through the night. The thunder of hooves. Not the plodding gait of a merchant's cart, but the powerful, synchronized gallop of war horses. They were close. Too close. She risked a glance over her shoulder and her heart stopped. A dozen riders, clad in armor as dark as a starless night, were pouring into the main street. At their head was a figure of breathtaking authority, a man so large he made his massive black warhorse look like a pony. Even from a distance, she could feel the power rolling off him in waves, a palpable force that choked the air. The sigil on their banner was the dire wolf of the royal house. Blackmir. It was him, the Alpha King. Panic, sharp and visceral, clawed at her throat. She had run from the jackals only to find the lion. She ducked into a narrower alley, her breath tearing from her lungs in ragged sobs. Her legs, unused to such exertion, screamed in protest, but she forced them on. She could hear shouts behind her, commands barked with absolute authority. She rounded a corner, her foot slipping on a patch of wet refuse. She cried out as she fell, her hands scraping against the rough stone wall. Pain lanced up her arm. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sting, and forced herself to keep moving. The alley opened into a small, deserted market square. Freedom was a lie. There was nowhere to go. The square was a kill box. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, her mind racing, and in that second, he was there. He didn't ride into the square. He simply appeared at the alley's mouth, a shadow detaching itself from other shadows. He was off his horse, moving with a silent, predatory grace that defied his size. The moonlight caught the silver inlay on his black leather armor and the hilt of the greatsword strapped to his back. He wasn't just a king, he was a warrior, built of corded muscle and raw, untamed power. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and as he stepped fully into the light, she saw his eyes. They were not brown or blue or gray. They were gold. Molten, luminous gold, like a crucible of liquid metal. And they were fixed on her. Elara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her body was locked in place, pinned by the sheer force of his presence. It felt like a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. This was not the authority of a man used to being obeyed. This was the elemental dominance of a predator at the apex of its food chain. He took a slow step toward her, his golden eyes never leaving her face. He wasn't looking at her scraped hands or her tattered dress. He was looking at her as if he were peeling back her skin, her muscle, her bone, and staring directly into her soul. A low sound rumbled in his chest, a growl that was too deep, too primal to be human. His gaze flickered down to her legs, to the feet that had carried her so swiftly away from the tavern. There was no sign of the limp she had so carefully cultivated. He had seen it. He had seen her run. A tremor went through him, a barely perceptible shudder that seemed to ripple through his massive frame. His nostrils flared, and his golden eyes widened, the molten color burning brighter, more intense. It was a look of profound, terrifying shock, a look of recognition. "You," he breathed, the word a plume of white vapor in the cold night air. It was not a question. It was an accusation, a revelation, a verdict. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. A strange, searing heat bloomed in Elara's chest, a dizzying pull toward him that was as terrifying as it was undeniable. It was a phantom string tied to her very core, and he was holding the other end. He tugged, and her soul answered. What was this? What was happening? He took another step, closing the distance between them. She could smell him now, the scent of pine, cold steel, and something else, something wild and musky that spoke of ancient forests and winter nights. It was intoxicating and terrifying. It made the beast of hunger in her stomach quiet, replaced by a new, far more dangerous kind of craving. His men were fanning out behind him, securing the square, their movements efficient and deadly. One of them, his face grim, approached the king. "Your Majesty, the Vanthorn curs have been dealt with. They were after a relic. We found—" The king raised a single hand, and the man fell silent instantly. He didn't even look at his soldier. His entire universe had narrowed to the trembling girl in the center of the square. Elara took a stumbling step back, the spell of his gaze momentarily broken. The lie. Her limp. It was all she had. She had to get it back. She forced her left leg to drag, manufacturing the familiar, painful gait. "Please," she whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "I'm nobody. Just a servant. My leg. His laugh was a short, harsh sound, utterly devoid of humor. "You ran like a stag in flight. There is nothing wrong with your leg." His gaze was a physical weight, searing her with its intensity. She felt stripped bare, her one pathetic defense torn away and trampled into the mud. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the strange, warm pull. He was the king, the alpha of all alphas, a man who could kill her with a word, a gesture, and she had been caught in a lie. He moved then, so fast she barely registered it. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he was standing directly in front of her, his shadow swallowing her whole. She had to crane her neck back to see his face. He was immense, a mountain of a man. He reached out, not with violence but with a strange, deliberate tenderness, and his fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. A bolt of pure energy, white-hot and electric, shot through her at his touch. It was like lightning striking her spine. She gasped, her knees buckling. He caught her easily, his other hand closing around her upper arm, his grip firm but not crushing. The heat intensified, a bonfire roaring to life inside her, centered where his skin met hers. It wasn't painful, it was a homecoming, a terrifying, unwanted homecoming. His eyes, those molten gold pools, were wide with a savage, disbelieving wonder. A storm of emotions warred in their depths, shock, fury, and something else, something so possessive and absolute it stole her breath. "For 6 years," he murmured, his voice a low, guttural rumble that vibrated through her bones. "6 years you have been hiding in my lands, under my nose, broken, maimed." He spat the words as if they were poison. "A lie." I don't know what you mean," she stammered, trying to pull away, but his grip was like iron. "My wolf has been howling," he whispered, his face lowering toward hers, his breath warm against her skin. A constant, maddening ache, a phantom limb I could feel, but never find. My kingdom withers. My men grow feral, because its heart was missing. He paused, his golden eyes searching hers, demanding an answer to a question he hadn't asked. It wasn't missing. It was hiding. He inhaled sharply, his eyes closing for a moment, as if in pain. When he opened them again, the raw shock had been forged into something harder, something unyielding, an undeniable certainty. "Mine," he growled, the word a visceral claim, a brand seared onto her soul. The phantom string in her chest pulled taut, a searing, undeniable connection. He was the source of the heat, the pull, the terrifying sense of belonging. He was her mate, and the most powerful, dangerous man in the world had just found her. The journey to the onyx spire was a blur of terror and confusion. King Kaelan had lifted her onto his warhorse as if she weighed nothing, seating her in front of him. His body was a wall of heat at her back, one arm a steel band around her waist, locking her against him. The strange energy still hummed between them, a current that made her skin tingle and her head spin. She was acutely aware of the hard planes of his chest, the rhythmic beat of his heart against her back, a powerful, steady drum that seemed to echo in her own blood. They rode through the night, a silent, deadly procession. His men, the elite Blackmir guard, formed a perimeter around them, their faces grim and unreadable. No one spoke. The only sounds were the muffled thunder of hooves and the whistle of the wind. Elara kept her eyes fixed on the neck of the great black horse, unable to look at the man who held her captive. Captive. That's what she was. He had called her mine, not a name, not a person, a possession. The onyx spire rose from the plains like a shard of night sky given solid form. It was a fortress of black, volcanic rock that seemed to drink the moonlight, its towers piercing the clouds. It wasn't a castle. It was a statement of power, brutal and absolute. As they passed through the massive gates, guards in black armor snapped to attention, their fists hitting their chests in a silent salute. Their gazes slid over her, curious and sharp, before quickly looking away, as if fearful of their king's wrath. Kaelan dismounted in a single fluid motion and then reached up for her. Elara flinched, pressing herself back against the saddle. His expression tightened, the gold in his eyes darkening to a ponderous, fiery amber. "Do not fight me," he commanded, his voice low and laced with a warning that sent a shiver of pure fear down her spine. "You will only hurt us both. Us." The word was a shock. He spoke as if they were already a single entity. Trembling, she allowed him to lift her down. His hands were huge, spanning her waist, and for a terrifying moment, she felt fragile as glass, utterly at his mercy. He did not release her immediately, holding her there as his beta, a scarred warrior named Riker, approached. "Your Majesty," Riker said, his eyes carefully averted from Elara. "The fortress is secure. Your chambers are prepared. Have Morwen brought to my private suite. Immediately," Kaelan ordered, his voice sharp. He finally released Elara, only to grip her elbow, his touch sending another jolt of that unnerving energy through her. He began to lead her into the heart of the fortress, his long strides forcing her into a near run to keep up. The lie of her limp was a distant memory, a foolish child's game. The inside of the fortress was as intimidating as the outside. Vast halls of polished black stone were hung with ancient banners depicting the dire wolf of his line. The air was cold and still, heavy with the weight of centuries of power. They climbed a winding staircase, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence, until he pushed open a set of heavy oak doors. The room was a cage, albeit a gilded one. It was a sprawling suite of chambers, larger than the entire tavern she'd worked in. A fire roared in a massive stone hearth, casting flickering shadows on walls lined with books. A huge bed, piled high with furs, dominated the center of the room. It was opulent, luxurious, and utterly terrifying. It was his room, his bed. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Where am I? Why have you brought me here?" "You are where you belong," he said, turning to face her. The firelight danced in his golden eyes, making them burn. "By my side." "I belong in a village in the northern valleys," she retorted, a spark of her old defiance flaring through her fear. "I am a servant, a nobody. You are no one," he agreed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as he stepped toward her. "You are the other half of my soul. You are the anchor to my rage. You are the queen this kingdom has been bleeding for." His words made no sense. They were the ravings of a madman, a beautiful, terrifying madman who held her life in his hands. "You're insane," she breathed. A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Kaelan's head snapped toward the sound, a low growl rumbling in his chest at the interruption. "Enter." An old woman shuffled into the room, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. This had to be Morwen, the healer he had summoned. She curtsied low, her gaze flicking from the king to Elara, and a look of profound understanding dawned on her face. "Alpha King," she said, her voice raspy with age. "You found her. Her scent is faint." "Wrong," Kaelan stated, his gaze returning to Elara, a frown creasing his brow. "She feels shielded, and she does not understand the bond." Morwen hobbled closer, her wise eyes studying Elara with an unnerving intensity. "She has been hiding, Your Majesty. Not just her body, but her spirit. It is a powerful glamour, self-imposed, a prison of her own making to keep the wolves at bay." She looked directly at Elara, her expression softening with something like pity. "Child, what are you?" "I'm nothing," Elara insisted, her voice trembling. "A human." Morwen chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "No human could dull the senses of an Alpha King for 6 years. No human could ignite the mate bond with such explosive force." She reached out a wrinkled hand. "May I?" Elara glanced at Kaelan, who gave a curt nod. Hesitantly, she extended her hand. Morwen's fingers, surprisingly warm and dry, closed over hers. The old woman's eyes fluttered shut. For a long moment, the only sound was the crackling of the fire. When Morwen's eyes opened again, they were wide with awe. "By the ancient blood," she whispered, her gaze fixed on Elara. She dropped Elara's hand as if it were hot. "It cannot be." "What?" Kaelan demanded, his patience wearing thin. "What is it?" "It is not a glamour, my king," Morwen said, her voice trembling with reverence. "It is a binding, a seal placed upon her as a child. Her power, it is dormant, chained, but it is there. I can feel the echo of it. A light, so bright and pure. She looked at Kaelan, her eyes shining. She is of the luminary bloodline. The name meant nothing to Elara, but Kaelan staggered back a step, his face a mask of disbelief. The Alpha King, who seemed as immovable as a mountain, looked utterly shaken. Impossible, he breathed. They were all destroyed, wiped out in the scouring 5 centuries ago. History is written by the victors, my king. Perhaps one survived. A child hidden away, her line forgotten, Morwen mused. She turned back to Elara. The luminaries were said to be living light, beings of immense creation and healing magic. They were the anchors of the world, the balance to the shadow and rage of the great shifter lines like your own, King Kaelan. Without them, the balance was lost. The world began to fray. Elara stared at them, her mind reeling. Light magic? Ancient bloodlines? This was the stuff of children's tales, of myth. It had nothing to do with her, a girl who had spent her life pretending to be crippled just to survive. This is a mistake, she said, shaking her head, denial her only refuge. My parents were simple farmers. They died of winter fever. I'm normal. There is nothing normal about you, Kaelan said, his voice regaining its strength, the shock being replaced by a fierce, burning conviction. He crossed the room and stood before her, his presence overwhelming. The mate bond does not lie. It is the most fundamental law of our existence. My soul recognized yours. The Blackmir shadow recognized the luminary light. He reached out and cupped her face, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. The jolt was still there, but this time, it was followed by a wave of something else, a profound, aching sense of rightness. You are the other half of me, Elara, whether you believe it yet or not. Her name on his lips was a strange intimacy. He had never asked it. He had simply known it. Another terrifying piece of this impossible puzzle. Morwen cleared her throat softly. The bond is new, and her powers are bound. It will be a turbulent time, Your Majesty. The connection will be unstable. There will be pain for both of you until it is either fully accepted and claimed, or, she trailed off, her expression grim, or it will break us both. Kaelan finished, his golden eyes locked on Elara's. It will drive me mad, and it will tear you apart from the inside out. There is no rejecting this, Elara. There is only survival. Our survival. Together. The days that followed were a strange torment. Elara was a prisoner in a palace, confined to the king's opulent chambers. He slept on a couch before the fire, a silent, brooding guardian, while she lay stiff and terrified in his massive bed, the scent of him clinging to the furs. He gave her space, but his presence was a constant, suffocating pressure. The bond between them was a living thing, a raw, exposed nerve. When he was near, it was a humming warmth in her veins. When he left the room, a cold, gnawing anxiety set in, an irrational fear that she had been abandoned. Worse was the pain. It came in waves, a sharp, splitting headache that mirrored the tension in her own mind. She learned quickly that her fear, her resistance, had a physical effect on him. Once, consumed by a fit of despair, she had huddled in a corner, weeping for the simple, miserable life she had lost. Minutes later, Kaelan had burst into the room, his face pale, one hand pressed to his temple. "Stop it," he had ground out, his voice tight with agony. "Your fear is a blade in my mind." The realization had horrified her. Her emotions were a weapon against him, against them both. From then on, she tried to wall off her feelings, to present a calm, blank facade, but it was exhausting. Morwen visited daily, bringing her food and gentle questions. She spoke of the luminaries, of a time when shifters and light-bearers ruled in balance. She explained that Elara's feigned limp wasn't just a lie. It was a physical manifestation of the bindings on her power. She had suppressed her own life force for so long that her body had nearly forgotten how to be whole. "Your power wants to be free, child," Morwen explained one afternoon as she examined Elara's hands. "The mate bond is the key. His alpha nature, his very soul, is calling to yours, battering against the locks." A week into her gilded captivity, the political storm broke. A summons arrived from the High Council. Lord Valerius Vanthorn, the man whose soldiers had attacked the tavern, was formally challenging the king's intentions. Kaelan stood by the window, staring out at the bleak plains as he read the scroll. Elara could feel the rage building in him, a palpable heat that warmed the air in the room. The bond made his emotions bleed into her, a terrifying and intimate violation. "What is it?" she asked, her voice quiet. He crushed the parchment in his fist. "Vanthorn. He questions my judgment. He speaks of an unvetted commoner, a cripple unfit to stand beside the throne. He demands that you be presented to the council, to be judged." The growl in his voice was terrifying. "He will not have you. I will not allow them to lay their filthy eyes on you, to pick you apart like vultures." "So what will you do?" she whispered. "Lock me in this tower forever?" His head snapped around, his golden eyes blazing. "I will keep you safe." "You will keep me a prisoner," she shot back, her own frustration boiling over. "I had a life. It was not much, but it was mine. You stole it from me." He crossed the room in 2 long strides, his shadow falling over her. He loomed over her, a figure of pure menace, and for a second she thought he might strike her. Instead, he dropped to one knee before her chair, a shocking act of submission from a man who commanded the world. He took her hands in his grip desperate. "Elara," he said, his voice raw, stripped of its royal command. It was just a man's voice, filled with a pain that echoed the ache in her own head. "Do you feel this fire in my blood? It is you. Before you, there was only duty, only the rage of the wolf. I was a king of ghosts, ruling a dying land. My soul was hollow. Now it is full of you, and the sheer terror of losing you is a madness I cannot bear." His vulnerability was a more potent weapon than his rage. It slipped past her defenses, touching a part of her she thought had died long ago. To see this powerful, indomitable king on his knees, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading agony, shattered her. She could feel the truth of his words through the bond, the echoing emptiness of his past, the searing, overwhelming totality of his focus on her now. "It hurts," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "All the time. My head." "I know," he murmured, bringing her hands to his lips and pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "It is the bond, straining against your fear, against the seals. Let me in, Elara. Trust me. Just a little. It will ease the pain." She looked down at his dark head, at the sheer power held in check, offered up to her. What choice did she have? To fight him was to fight herself, to tear them both apart. Slowly, hesitantly, she relaxed the iron grip on her emotions. She didn't embrace the bond, not yet, but she stopped fighting it. A shudder went through him, a deep sigh escaped his lips, a sound of profound relief. The crushing pressure in her own skull receded, leaving behind a dull, manageable ache. The heat in her veins softened from a wildfire to a warm, steady glow. In that moment, looking into his desperate golden eyes, she saw not a king or a monster, but a man chained to her, just as she was to him. "Vanthorn wants a show," Kaelan said, his voice hardening as he rose to his feet, the king returning. "He wants to see the king's mate. So be it. You're going to take me before the council?" she asked, alarmed. "No," he said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "I am going to remind them why the House of Blackmir rules. I am going to deal with this nuisance so he never threatens you again." He strode to the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. "I will return in 3 days. The guard has been tripled. You will be safe here." He looked at her one last time, his gaze intense, possessive. "Do not be afraid," he commanded softly. And then he was gone. The silence he left behind was heavier than his presence had been. The cold anxiety immediately began to creep back in, a testament to the truth of his words. She was tied to him, and he had just walked into the heart of his enemy's territory, leaving her alone. The first 2 days of Kaelan's absence were an exercise in controlled panic. Elara paced the luxurious cage of his chambers, the warmth of the bond fading to a distant, unsettling hum. With him gone, the gnawing ache behind her eyes returned, a constant, dull throb. She felt his absence like a physical wound. She tried to read the books that lined the walls, but the words blurred. She ate the food that was brought to her, but it tasted like ash. Anya, her friend from the tavern, had been brought to the fortress at Elara's timid request, a small comfort in this vast, intimidating world. She was given rooms nearby and served as Elara's handmaiden, her familiar presence a small anchor in a sea of strangeness. "He'll be all right, you know," Anya said on the second evening, brushing Elara's hair. "They say no one can stand against the Alpha King when his rage is up." "That's what I'm afraid of," Elara whispered. She could feel the distant thrum of his anger through the bond, a low, simmering fire far away. It made her skin crawl. On the third night, the night he was due to return, the fortress fell silent. Not the usual quiet of a disciplined military installation, but a dead, unnatural stillness. The guards outside her door were gone. "Anya!" Elara called out, her heart beginning to pound. Anya appeared in the doorway of the adjoining room, her face pale. "The guards, they're not at their posts. Something is wrong." A cold dread, sharp and absolute, washed over Elara. This was Vanthorn. He hadn't waited for a political victory. While Kaelan was away, he had struck at the heart. Suddenly, a scream echoed from the lower levels of the fortress, quickly silenced. It was followed by the clash of steel, then another scream. The sounds were muted, distant, but unmistakable. The spire was under attack. "We have to hide," Anya gasped, her eyes wide with terror. But where? They were in the king's chambers, the highest point of the fortress, the most obvious target. Elara's mind raced. Kaelan had shown her a hidden passage once, a secret exit for the king concealed behind a tapestry depicting a great wolf hunt. "This way," she said, grabbing Anya's hand and pulling her toward the wall. Her fingers fumbled along the edge of the heavy fabric, searching for the stone release she had only seen once. Her own fear was a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but the thought of Anya, innocent in all this, being harmed, sparked something else inside her, a fierce, protective instinct. She found the latch. The wall groaned open, revealing a narrow, dark staircase spiraling down into blackness. "Go," she urged, pushing Anya ahead of her. The air inside was stale and cold. They plunged into the darkness, Elara pulling the stone door shut behind them, just as they heard the splintering crash of the main chamber doors being broken down. They scrambled down the winding steps, their breathing loud in the confined space. The passage was meant for one person, and they stumbled against each other in the pitch black. Below, the sounds of fighting grew louder, clearer. Vanthorn's men were inside, deep inside the fortress. How was that possible? The stairs ended abruptly at a small stone landing and a heavy iron-banded door. Elara pushed on it. Locked. Of course it was locked. They were trapped. "What do we do?" Anya sobbed, her voice trembling. Footsteps. Heavy, armored footsteps coming from the other side of the door. They were not alone. A key scraped in the lock. Elara shoved Anya behind her, her body trembling, her mind screaming. There was no escape. The door swung inward, revealing not a Vanthorn soldier, but Lord Valerius Vanthorn himself. He was a tall, slender man with pale, cunning eyes and a cruel twist to his lips. He held a torch aloft, the flickering light casting long, dancing shadows. Behind him stood two of his guards, their swords drawn. "Well, well," Valerius said, his voice a silken sneer. "The little mouse comes out of her hole." His eyes roamed over Elara, a hungry, speculative gleam in them. "I must admit, I don't see the appeal. Scrawny, frightened, hardly the stuff of queens." "Leave her alone," Anya cried, stepping out from behind Elara. Valerius's gaze flickered to Anya, dismissing her with a contemptuous glance. "The Alpha King has powerful wards on this fortress, but wards are made to be broken, especially when one knows the words to unmake them." He took a step into their small space, forcing them back against the cold stone. He is a fool, leaving his greatest treasure so poorly guarded. "He will kill you for this," Elara said, her voice shaking, but laced with a defiance she didn't know she possessed. Valerius laughed. "He will be too late. You see, I know the old stories, the ones the Blackmirs tried to burn. I know what a luminary is, and I know what happens when that light is consumed. It grants power beyond measure." His smile was predatory. "He thinks you are his anchor, his salvation. But you, my dear, are simply a wellspring of power waiting to be tapped." He gestured to his men. "Take her." The guards moved forward. Anya screamed and tried to stand in their way, but one of them simply backhanded her, sending her sprawling to the stone floor. Something inside Elara snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was a visceral, primal eruption. Seeing Anya fall, seeing the casual cruelty in Vanthorn's eyes, ignited a fire within her. The protective instinct became a raging inferno. The seals on her power, already weakened by the bond, shattered. A wordless scream tore from her throat, but it was not just sound. It was light. A blinding, searing wave of pure white energy exploded from her body. It was not the gentle glow Morwen had described. It was the fury of a dying star. The guards cried out, shielding their eyes, and were thrown back against the stone walls as if by a physical blow. The torch in Vanthorn's hand was extinguished, plunging the passage into absolute darkness, save for the faint, residual luminescence that now clung to Elara's skin. She stood panting, her hands glowing with a soft, pearlescent light. The headache was gone, replaced by a thrumming, intoxicating power that coursed through her veins. She felt whole. For the first time in her life, she felt utterly and completely herself. Valerius groaned, pushing himself up. He was shielded by some dark amulet around his neck, which now smoked and sizzled. "So the little bird has claws," he hissed, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and avaricious glee. "Magnificent." Before he could move, a roar of pure, bestial fury echoed from the top of the stairs, a sound that shook the very stones of the fortress. It was a sound of absolute rage, of a predator whose territory had been invaded, whose mate had been threatened. Kaelan. He had felt it. He had felt her terror, her rage, the explosion of her power across the bond. And he had come. Valerius's face paled. He knew that sound. Every shifter in the kingdom knew that sound. It was the Alpha King unleashed. "No matter," Valerius snarled, grabbing the dazed Anya by the hair and hauling her to her feet. He pressed the tip of a wicked-looking dagger to her throat. "A hostage will do nicely." He began backing away, dragging Anya with him. "Another time, my little beacon." He disappeared into the darkness of the lower corridors, his laughter echoing back up the stairs. Elara started to go after them, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. The sudden release of power had left her drained, shaking. And then he was there. Kaelan appeared at the top of the stairs, not as a man, but as a nightmare. He was in his full wolf form, a creature of breathtaking size and terror. He was half again as large as his warhorse, a beast of rippling black muscle and shadow, his fur the color of midnight. His eyes were twin pools of molten gold, burning with an insane feral light. He was no longer a king. He was rage given form. The sight of him should have terrified her. But through the bond, she felt not a threat, but a wave of all-consuming, desperate protectiveness aimed entirely at her. He saw her, saw she was alive, and a fraction of the feral madness receded, replaced by a focused, lethal intent. His gaze swept the scene, the unconscious guards, the lingering scent of Vanthorn's dark magic, the terrified look on Elara's face. He took in the faint light still clinging to her skin, and a low growl of pure wonder rumbled in his chest, even through the rage. He shifted his attention to the corridor, where Vanthorn had fled. A promise of brutal, bloody retribution radiated from him. He took a step to pursue, to hunt, to tear his enemy limb from limb. "No!" Elara cried out, her voice stronger now. "Kaelan, wait! He has Anya." The great wolf stilled, his head turning back to her. He couldn't speak in this form, but she felt his conflict through the bond, the feral need to hunt versus the tactical awareness that his hostage was in danger. He looked at her, a question in his burning golden eyes. She met his gaze, her own fear solidifying into resolve. Vanthorn had made this personal. He had hurt her friend. He had threatened her king. He had tried to turn her into a weapon. "I'm going after them," she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "And you are going to help me." The final confrontation was not in a throne room or on a battlefield. It was in the cold, damp dark of the crypts beneath the onyx spire. Valerius had fled there, to the one place in the fortress steeped in enough death and shadow to partially mask his presence from Kaelan's senses. Elara, guided by the faint, lingering trail of her own stolen light that clung to him, led the way. Kaelan, now back in his human form, but with the feral rage still simmering just beneath his skin, followed at her side. His hand never left the hilt of his greatsword, and his golden eyes scanned every shadow. "He knows these passages," Kaelan growled, his voice a low rumble. "His ancestors are buried here. from before his house was disgraced. This is his ground. He has my friend, Elara said simply, her focus absolute. The power that had exploded from her had settled into a steady, warm hum beneath her skin. It felt like coming home. She was no longer just a servant girl, no longer just a mate. She was something more, and for the first time, she was not afraid of it. They found them in the central burial chamber, a vast, circular room lined with stone sarcophagi. Valerius stood in the center, a struggling Anya held before him, the same cursed dagger at her throat. "So, the king comes, with his little light-up toy in tow," Valerius sneered, his eyes wild. He was cornered, and it made him more dangerous. "One step closer, Blackmir, and the girl dies." Kaelan stopped, his body coiled like a spring. The urge to leap across the room and tear Valerius's throat out was a physical force Elara could feel through the bond. She placed a hand on his arm, a silent plea for restraint. He looked down at her, his jaw tight, and gave a minute nod. "Let the girl go, Vanthorn," Kaelan commanded, his voice echoing with royal authority. "Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with the fate that gave the greatest power in a generation to a brute like you," Valerius spat. "You have no vision. You use your power to hold on to a dying kingdom. With her," he gestured with his head toward Elara, "I could remake the world." "You would bleed her dry and leave the world in darkness," Elara said, her own voice surprisingly steady. The light within her pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "I can feel what you are. A void. A parasite." Valerius's face twisted in a snarl. "Enough talk." He shoved Anya away, sending her stumbling toward the far wall, and lunged, not at Kaelan, but at Elara. He was fast, unnaturally so, his movements enhanced by dark magic. But Kaelan was faster. He moved like a shadow, intercepting Valerius's charge. Their blades met with a deafening clang that rang through the crypt. Steel sang as they exchanged blows, a deadly dance between the raw power of the Alpha King and the desperate, magic-fueled cunning of the usurper. Elara ran to Anya, helping her to her feet. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Anya choked out, her eyes fixed on the deadly duel. "Elara, what's happening to you?" "I'm remembering who I am," Elara said, her gaze locked on Kaelan. She could feel his exertion, his focused rage, his unwavering determination to protect her. The bond was a torrent of sensation, no longer painful, but a source of shared strength. Kaelan was stronger, but Valerius was treacherous. As Kaelan pressed his attack, forcing Valerius back, the lordling threw a black powder into the air. Kaelan recoiled, coughing, his eyes momentarily blinded. In that instant, Valerius lunged, not with his sword, but with the cursed dagger. He drove it deep into Kaelan's side. A scream of pure agony ripped through the bond, striking Elara with the force of a physical blow. She stumbled, clutching her own side as if she had been stabbed. Kaelan roared, a sound of pain and fury, and swatted Valerius away with a powerful backhand that sent him crashing into a stone sarcophagus. Kaelan dropped to one knee, his hand clamped over the wound in his side. Black veins were already spreading from the dagger's entry point, a visible sign of the dark poison at work. He tried to rise, but his strength was failing him. "The blade of sorrows," Valerius coughed, a bloody smile on his lips as he struggled to stand. "A poison that devours a shifter's soul from the inside out. He's already dead, and now your power is mine." He began to stalk toward the kneeling king, his sword raised for the final blow. But he didn't get there. Elara stepped between them. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it resonated with an ancient power that made the very stones hum. She raised her hands. The soft glow that had clung to her erupted into a column of brilliant, blinding light. It was not the angry, uncontrolled burst from before. This was focused, deliberate. It was the pure, undiluted power of a luminary, fully awakened. The shadows in the crypt evaporated. The air grew warm, filled with the scent of ozone and starlight. Valerius shielded his eyes, crying out as the pure light seared his dark magic. "What is this?" "This is balance," Elara declared, her voice ringing with an authority that matched the king's own. She felt Kaelan's awe, his pride, his love, pouring into her through the bond. He was her anchor. His belief in her gave her the strength to control the storm raging within. She drew on his steadfastness, shaping the raw power into a weapon. She focused the light, not on destroying Valerius, but on Kaelan. A beam of pure white energy flowed from her hands and enveloped him. He cried out as the light hit him, his body arching in pain. But it was a cleansing pain. The black, creeping veins of the poison hesitated, then began to recede, burned away by the sacred light. The cursed dagger, still embedded in his side, glowed red-hot and then dissolved into dust. Valerius watched, his face a mask of horror and disbelief. "No, that power is for consuming, for taking, not for healing." He charged her, his sword raised, a last, desperate gamble. Elara didn't flinch. She simply turned her attention to him, and a wave of pure, solid light slammed into him. He was thrown backward, his body hitting the far wall with a sickening crack. The light enveloped him, and when it faded, he was no longer there. In his place, embedded in the stone weptomol, was a perfect black crystal pulsing with a faint, trapped darkness. Imprisoned, not killed. The light around Elara slowly subsided, leaving her standing in the now silent crypt, panting from the exertion. The power receded, not vanishing, but settling deep within her, a wellspring she could now draw upon at will. Kaelan rose to his feet, his wound completely gone. He walked toward her, his golden eyes filled with an emotion so profound it made her heart ache. He stopped before her, the Alpha King, the monster, the warrior, looking at her as if she were the most sacred thing in the world. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and cupped her cheek. "I felt my soul dying," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "And then you sang it back to life." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, tears of relief, of exhaustion, of a joy so fierce it was painful. "I have you," she whispered, echoing the words he had once spoken to her. He gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly, burying his face in her hair. "You have all of me," he murmured against her skin. "Always." In the quiet of the crypt, surrounded by the ghosts of his ancestors, the king held his queen. The shadow had found its light, and the world, for the first time in centuries, felt whole again. They returned to his chambers, the fortress now secure. The remaining Vanthorn loyalists rounded up by Riker and the Blackmir guard. Kaelan dismissed everyone, sealing the doors. For the first time, they were truly alone, the threat gone, the secrets revealed. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was intimate, filled with unspoken emotion. Elara stood by the fire, watching the flames, still feeling the echo of the immense power she had wielded. It was a part of her now, as real as her own heartbeat. She was no longer Elara the broken servant. She was Elara of the luminary line. Kaelan came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her back against his solid warmth. He rested his chin on her shoulder, his breath a warm caress against her neck. "I saw you," he said, his voice a low, reverent murmur, "in the square that night. I saw you run, and in that moment, everything else ceased to exist. The council, the border skirmishes, the crown. It all turned to dust." He turned her in his arms to face him, his golden eyes searching hers, filled with a raw, breathtaking vulnerability that eclipsed even his display in this room days ago. He gently took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "You taught yourself to limp to be forgotten by the world," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that shook her to her core. "I saw you run and forgot the world existed. You will not kneel before my throne. You are the throne upon which my soul finds its rest." Her breath caught. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to her. It was a vow, a coronation, a declaration of love all woven into one. It was the truth of them, of the shadow and the light, the broken and the whole, the king and the girl who ran. "Kaelan," she breathed, her hand coming up to cup his face, her thumb tracing the line of his strong jaw. "I love you," he said, the words simple, absolute, and carrying the weight of his entire being. "My mate, my queen, my light." "I love you," she answered, and the words were not forced, not a surrender, but a joyous, triumphant claiming of her own. This terrifying, possessive, powerful man was hers, as she was his. A shudder of pure relief and ecstasy went through him. The bond between them flared, no longer a strained connection, but a brilliant, searing sun. It demanded completion. He lowered his head, his eyes burning with intent, with love, with need. "It is time," he murmured against her lips. "Let me claim you, Elara. Let me mark you as mine, before the gods and the ancestors. Let me make us whole." She tilted her head back, offering the soft, vulnerable skin of her neck. It was not an act of submission, but of trust, of ultimate partnership. "Yes," she whispered. He bent his head, his lips tracing a fiery path along her throat before his teeth, sharp and primal, gently grazed the junction between her neck and shoulder. He paused, looking into her eyes, giving her one last chance to retreat. She met his gaze without fear, her heart swelling with love for him. With a low growl of possession, he bit down. Pain, sharp and electric, lanced through her, but it was instantly consumed by a wave of pure, unadulterated pleasure. A golden light exploded behind her eyes, and she felt the bond snap perfectly and completely into place. It was a fusion. His memories, his emotions, his strength poured into her. She felt his lonely childhood, the crushing weight of his crown, the maddening ache of his incomplete soul, and the blinding, world-altering moment he first saw her run. In turn, she felt her own walls crumble, her own life flowing into him. The years of fear and hiding, the quiet friendship with Anya, the terror in the alley, and the fierce, brilliant blossoming of her love for him. They were one, whole, complete. When he finally lifted his head, the mark on her shoulder was a faint, swirling pattern of silver and gold, glowing with a soft light before it faded into her skin, a permanent testament to their union. He rested his forehead against hers, both of them trembling, breathless. She could hear his thoughts now, a whisper in her mind. Mine. And she answered back, her own thought, a clear, bright bell in his soul. Yours. 6 months later, Elara stood on the balcony of the onyx spire, Kaelan's arms securely around her waist. Below, the lands that had been bleak and gray were now lush and green. The kingdom was thriving. The balance had been restored. She was no longer a prisoner in this fortress. She was its heart. Her hand rested on her gently swelling abdomen, a silent promise of the future, of a new line that would carry both shadow and light. She wore the gowns of a queen now, but she never forgot the girl with the feigned limp. That girl had taught her how to survive. Kaelan had taught her how to live, and together, they had learned how to rule. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to her temple, his love a warm, constant presence in her mind and heart. The Alpha King had found his mate, and in doing so, had healed his kingdom and his soul. The girl who ran had finally found a reason to stop. She was home. Thank you so much for listening to this story on His Wolf Knew First. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a new tale. Drop a comment below telling me which moment moved you the most. Your support truly means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next story on His Wolf Knew First.